And our mics are back on. Madam Mayor, at 6:02 and we're live.
Good evening, everyone. Stop it. I'd like to call this Tuesday, January 29th, Electric Utility City Commission meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Pam Triolo.
Here.
Vice Mayor Andy Amoroso.
Here.
Commissioner Scott Maxwell.
Here.
Commissioner Omari Hardy.
Here.
Commissioner Herman Robinson.
Here.
If everyone would please rise for the pledge, led by Commissioner Maxwell.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Additions, deletions, reordering.
Yes, Madam Mayor, we have an addition, item B, approving the purchase of new network security equipment for the EU networks was added to the consent agenda. You should have backup. You should have received the backup, but another copy is on the dais for each of you.
Does everyone have that
We do.
item? Commissioners, you all have it? Okay. Seeing that, I'll entertain the motion on the agenda as amended. Moved by Vice Mayor Pro Tem, second.
Second.
All those in favor state so by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. We're going to start, folks, with our presentations, which is, of course, our electric utility update. Just want to first mention that I know we formalized it kind of the last time, but this is a new introduction to our commission meetings, our regular commission meetings. This is our electric utility city commission meeting, meaning that all the items we discuss in this meeting are, of course, related to the electric utility. So when we have public participation of non-agenda items or consent agenda items, please keep in mind that these are all related to the electric utility, not general discussion or general comments. So that's is what our time will be used for in these meetings specifically. So without further ado, the grand poobah of our electric utility.
Well, thank you and good evening. Thank you for having me. Ed Liberty, Director of the Electric Utility here at Lake Worth. I'm not going to read from a speech. It's going to be more of a rolling conversation and discussion of some of the things that we're doing, and I'll walk you through a number of items. The first item that we want to talk about is an update on what we've been doing. This particular report, I call this a significant items report. This is the exact same format that I use with my staff. At my staff meetings, we go through this probably twice a month. They really love the exercise. But we break it up into areas that I call significant activities that they've been undertaking and working on, significant issues that they're dealing with at the moment, and significant events. These are all work-related, by the way. So to walk you through that, give you a feel for that, how that works, and some of the things that we've been doing. Speaking to the first one, significant activities. We spent a good part of our time in the first quarter of 2019, fiscal 19, right? So that's October, November, December, working on the power purchase contract, which we executed and finalized on the last working day of the year. So we're under a new contract now with OUC. Thanks for the work of a lot of the folks in this room, including council who was heavily involved with us. Scorecard development. So in a few minutes, we'll get to a section of the documents that you're holding. That's a scorecard. That's a balanced scorecard that reports on key parameters of the business that we manage. And we'll be talking about 2 of the 4 quadrants of the scorecard tonight, not all 4, just 2. SHRIP, which is our System Hardening and Reliability Improvement Program. We had SHRIP 1 and SHRIP 2, so we're underway with portions of SHRIP 1, as well as in physical construction in the field. Some of the projects have been initiated. We're also underway with our engineering efforts. We've also had to develop construction standards, so as we hire contractors to build things for us, we need to be able to hand them a standard document that refers to how they should construct our equipment and install it. Developing the capital investment plan or the capital investment program that's necessary to execute on SHRIP 1 and SHRIP 2, having a good understanding of what those costs are. And those costs will be evolving constantly, because what we'll do is we begin with a conceptual estimate, and then as we do more detailed engineering and we begin to get bids or detailed cost estimates back from our consultants, we update what we think the capital requirements will be to execute those projects. You're going to be hearing more about this at the February 19th meeting. We're going to walk you through a presentation on just SHRIP. At that point, you'll see, for example, force ranking of our poorest performing circuits from the worst circuit to the best circuit, the amount of dollars that we're investing in each one of those circuits down to the cost per customer, which is a good metric to have in mind, and the timing of when those field construction activities begin and when they should be complete. So you're going to see more detail on that on the February 19th meeting. And we'll be able to show you by section of the city when we're starting the work and when those particular circuits we completed. So we'll go through a map, if you will, of the territory, and you'll see it change over time. It's also important as a part of that we do the modeling, and that's to understand how is the electric system behaving today, how will it behave under certain electrical contingencies, and how it will change when we modify the system. So we're doing that now as well. Next significant activity we had was at the power plant. So our power plant saw a lot more runtime in September, October, November timeframe than it had in prior years. That was driven largely by a much warmer fall than we had seen in prior years, together with the maintenance schedules of other power plant units in the Florida Municipal Power Pool. So that fall season, once you get past the summer run, is typically when the power plants begin to schedule their maintenance outages. So it's not unusual that you would have units out for maintenance outages in the fall. And then if you have an abnormally warm fall and those units are on a maintenance outage, the units that are higher up in the dispatch queue, like ours, would get called to run sooner. So that's what we experienced in the fall. So when later on, you'll see that we had a little bit more overtime in the power plant. That's related to that increased run time that we experienced. SCADA system, that is the system that monitors our distribution system in the field. It brings us back as a data acquisition system. It brings back key operating parameters and condition of equipment to our control center. We are in need of replacing it, and you've approved us to go ahead and replace it. We spent a fair amount of time making sure that we understood the capabilities of a system that we wanted, define it, evaluate the vendors, and make that vendor recommendation, which we've done. Trip savers, those are devices that we installed on our branch circuits. We got those installed. We installed 80 of them. We bought another 325, but the 80 are out there in service today, and they're already showing benefits. We've seen a turnaround, not a great turnaround, but we've seen a bending of the curve in our reliability indices as these devices are installed out in the field now and operating. We did a complete upgrade and replacement of the relay protection panels at the Hypoluxo station. So Hypoluxo is where we interconnect to the FPL grid. That's the 138 kV interconnection. We upgraded to digital control systems from the old analog systems, mechanical systems. So that's now operating and protecting the system at a higher level than it was before. That had to be done in coordination with FPL because we had to take outages and schedule equipment out of service. We were making improvements at our end at the same time that they were making improvements at their end. And that project went well. Financial modeling, understanding our utility finances much better than just budget performance, but understanding what our cost of service is to be able to deliver basic electric service to each customer class by connection voltage and by type of customer, so that we can understand where we're making money. Are we making the correct amount of money from the correct group of customers in terms of residential, commercial, and commercial demand, solar net metered, things like that, and the special contract, the special rate that we have for the college. So we've got a much better understanding of that, and being able to then model in our new cost structure and our projected capital spending to see what our fund balances will be going forward and what our debt coverage ratios will be going forward. IBW negotiations and arbitration. Yes, we are, as you know, in negotiations with the IBW. I won't get into the details because that's handled confidentially. But we do have an arbitration currently scheduled for July, where we have a difference of opinion with the IBW on a labor matter with respect to how many people we call out for repairs, emergency repairs on the system, and how we utilize our existing workforce. We won't get into a lot of detail, but we have a difference of opinion on how many people are needed to do the job and the type of people that can do the job. And they've agreed that, and they have elected to go to arbitration. We're standing our ground, and we're going to arbitration.
You have a meeting scheduled with us on regards to that?
There's no meeting scheduled at this point.
Commissioner Hardy?
Has there been any thinking about scheduling a meeting with us about that going forward?
Yes, there would be.
Okay.
Right now, we're preparing the information that we need. We've been focusing on scheduling time with the arbitrator. It's had to be rescheduled a number of times because of the arbitrator's availability.
Right.
So that'll come down the road.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Right now, I think we're scheduled for arbitration on July 25th is the next time that all of the parties are available for the arbitration. Second tie line, that's the second tie line on the 138 kV side. We have kicked off the conceptual study with our consulting engineer to look at potential routes and schedules and costs to complete those. So that work is underway right now. Significant issues, continued focus on decreasing discretionary spending, so managing to our budgets, and where we have an opportunity to have discretion over an expense, we do exercise that. That's a constant focus, and you'll see that in the financials in a few minutes. Recruiting. We have open positions, new positions that we added, as well as filling positions where people departed. Recruiting is a challenge. It's always a challenge in a tight marketplace. It's a little bit tighter at Lake Worth, but we're working our way through it and continue seeking the right candidates to come here to work at Lake Worth and add to the team. So that's a challenge. Solar net metering is something we'll be talking about more down the road. It is a significant issue. You'll see that in the financials. The amount of customers that are availing themselves of solar net metering is growing significantly, as are the dollars associated with the purchases of that power from those customers. And we'll be talking a lot more about that. Collections is an issue that we need to flag, and we'll be coming back to talk more about. So you're seeing that not all of these significant issues we're going to tackle tonight. These are things that have to be tackled sequentially and in a series of meetings so they can be thought about and then opined on properly. And there's some education that goes along with each one of these. But they're things that we're working on already as staff. Our collections numbers are growing. They are significant, and they do impact us because those are dollars that went out for collections, meaning that customers didn't pay us those dollars, yet they did avail themselves of the service and take the product. Significant events that we've experienced, we did put into place, as I mentioned, new power contracts. So that's as of January 1, we're under new contract. And the other significant event that we completed was the Generation Resource Plan, which was a look at what our power generation sources should be over the coming years. Utilities do this on a regular basis. It's not unusual to do this. So some folks have said, gee, that's unusual, or do this all the time. The largest utilities kind of do it as a continuing process. We've done the first one that I'm aware of, and we have an idea of where we need to be going under certain market conditions. So that covers our significant items reports. If there's any questions on any of those subjects, I'll glad to answer them.
Commissioner Hardy?
Is there a relationship between the significant issue, continued focus on decreasing discretionary spending, and our position that's leading us to arbitration?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And it's managing to the labor contract as we interpret it.
Understood.
Vice Mayor?
Just a couple things. So most recently, we had some issues with Click2Gov, and then there was a little backup as far as a lot of people calling in to make payments over the phone versus doing it online. And then the call center was backed up, and the calls were being pushed out of state, and therefore they couldn't answer all the questions. So I just want to make sure that, that wasn't in your comments, but it was a concern to me. So
It's a concern from the standpoint of customer interaction, but it hasn't necessarily driven up our collections number or disconnect number. So it's an inconvenience. It makes it more difficult for a customer to interact with us, which is not what we want.
yeah.
But it's not affecting the financials.
Okay, and then has there been any internal conversation about possibly looking at spending some penny sales tax on the new tide line? Because I think we're kind of out of sync here. We have a meeting on the 7th to talk about penny sales tax, but then we're not going to see you again until later on.
Right.
And, is that an option for you? Is that something you've talked about? Is it not something? Is it something that you want us to consider on at our 7th meeting? You know, I think we need to kind of, you know,
That's a good question. My focus has been on determining what the system needs and what it will cost. The actual source of the money to further that program, I've assumed would be from any number of sources, one of which could include the penny sales tax. But I leave that to the finance side of the house to determine what's the best source of the money to execute on the plan.
and feasibly that comes back to us at some point. So,
If I can, Madam Mayor,
and I have others. Sorry.
the conversation on the budget as we ramp that up is where you'll start to see some of these intersect a little better. But developing an actual cost figure is kind of our holding
Yeah.
pattern right now. But that's a good point.
I'm gonna finish up.
The solar, we've had that conversation multiple times. The solar's concerning to me. And I hope that we can talk about that sooner than later, because really what's happening is we have a great PACE program. People are taking advantage of it. However, we're paying more out than we're actually buying on the open market. And I personally would like to see those numbers and see what's going on internally, because I personally think that we should not be paying out more than we currently pay. You know, if that goes up, we pay more. If it goes down, we pay less. But at some point, we have to stop the bleeding. And I think there's funds going out and not coming in. And we really need to take a look at that sooner than later.
True. At a very high level, solar net metering was a well-intentioned plan when it was put in place, when it affected 3 or 4 customers. Today, that number is in excess of 70 and going into the 90s probably in terms of numbers of customers. The dollars went from being negligible now to basically erasing the gains of adding 80 residential customers, for example. What we also need to do as a part of this whole net metering discussion, we'll be coming back with much more detailed discussion on this, is to put in place interconnection agreements. We have no interconnection agreements. Right now, the only thing that a customer has to do is pass an electrical inspection, and by the way, that inspection doesn't even have to be here. It could have been in Palm Springs, yet they're connected to our system. We don't have any insurance requirements, yet the utilities that surround us have both interconnection agreements and insurance requirements. We currently pay little over 3 times what we could have bought that power for.
And that's concerning to me. So I'd
Right.
like to see that sooner than later. The only other thing it wasn't on here, but I just wanted to mention it. Driving around the city, I know we had the one issue with there was possible gunshots at some of our equipment.
Yes.
Driving around the city, I noticed roundabout at I don't know if that's been taken care of or not, but on 12th North, 12th South, when you drive by, it's fenced in,
Yes.
but it's not covered. Is there a reason why we don't cover those? You know, because to me, kid driving by, you're a kid, you're driving by, you see a big metal box, boom, boom, boom. You know, is there a reason why we don't cover those
The
so people driving by
substations
just-
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not unusual that the substations would be fenced in. It does a few things. One is it keeps people out who shouldn't be in
Correct.
there, or debris,
But
or
why wouldn't we cover that with some kind of, just so it's not in your face where you drive,
right.
big box that
Right.
shoot at it.
I promise we haven't talked about this at a time, but I will share with you
Okay.
is that
That's
I
what I have at the
I have directed staff, and they are bringing me designs for wall-like structures around the substations that would look kind of in concept like the highway sound barriers where you drop panels in the posts. But I've insisted that it be nice looking.
And we could even do murals, we could do other things to
Exactly.
stop with the graffiti, but,
Exactly.
you know, something that will stop some of the issues that we had talked about and, you know, make
So-
it a little bit more visible.
What these walls would do is they would be panels that drop in. They can be plain flat panels. They can be look like the siding on a home, for example, like a lap straight type or cedar siding look, not wood. They could be fiberglass. They could also be ballistic if we wanted them to be, or concrete, which of course would be ballistic. Each one of our substations, we currently have 9, we'll be going to 6 in the future, would have a structure around them.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Robinson?
The
net metering, we're still want to incentivize that or encourage it. That's our goal.
Well, that's a matter of policy. I'll leave that to the policymakers, but from the standpoint of operating the utility, I can share with you what it's costing us in terms of the excess that we're paying above market prices for that power.
Okay, so you would want an understanding of policy before you start working on something that isn't policy.
We're evaluating multiple options to figure out, we may make a proposal, but we'll ultimately be looking for a policy decision on which way to go.
And so when would you expect that?
We'd probably be the earliest that we'd be back to you with some documents to look at and understand it better would be at the February 19th meeting.
Okay, so we can do a consensus. Would that be policy, or do we make,
We'll actually vote on it.
we actually vote?
Mhm.
And so, okay, I'm looking
Right.
forward to a
So what-
cohesive.
What's effectively happened now is, I think, the number of years ago when the program was put in place, I'm not sure that it was envisioned that it would grow to where it is today. So my view is it's a good opportunity to come back and say, this is where it's grown to today. This is what it means financially. Do you want to continue, or do you want to modify it?
Well, growing is good. The idea, but to make it financially feasible for both parties is what your challenge is.
Yeah, the perspective of growth is it depends on who you are. So at the moment, we're in the business of selling electricity. So we buy it at price A, we sell it at price B, and we support the general fund and the city operations and the department in the space between. What we're saying here is for this particular class of customers, that space between is decreased. And it's all of the customers in the systems who are basically paying for that above market cost of power.
And isn't this coming back as an agenda item that we'll be voting on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because this is supposed to be an overview of all the different things just to keep in mind today.
Okay.
We'll get into detailed conversation when it comes back as an agenda item in February.
Okay, I just wanted to
Please, you can finish your question.
clarify how
Yeah.
you were going to approach it with the policy or without a policy. The other question is on the penny sales tax. If you're an enterprise a fund,
Right.
is that in play? Is that penny sales tax in play to a specific enterprise fund?
I'd have to look to the finance department to consult with them and say, what would they suggest in terms of sources of funding to execute on this capital project?
Well, but it would also be a legal question in terms of whether the penny sales tax can be just distributed to a separate enterprise.
Yeah, I don't have that answer.
Right, I think we have to go back and look at the enabling legislation, but I believe they talk about in general governmental infrastructure, and this would certainly be part of our governmental infrastructure, but I'm definitely gonna go back and look at,
Even though it's a separate,
correct.
okay, it just,
We'll go back and
once
check
that
it.
clarified, so that it would be good if the enterprise fund could take care of itself. But, good. That's-
Vice Mayor, I know I said that it's an agenda item, but if you have any direction that you'd like to give the utility director when they do bring back that item, I didn't want to take your thunder away.
Well, I just wanted to clarify because I've asked specific questions and I don't know that everybody else has had those questions or talked to Ed about it. I'm not looking at killing a solar project or killing the PACE program, but it's almost like we did when we stepped back and we said, what are the hard costs to get power to somebody's house? It came up to $32.50. That was the hard cost. So if you use no power, it's going to cost you $32.50. The same thing with this. We now have identified that we can buy on the open market for $2, and we're paying somebody with the PACE program $10 to buy it back. I just want to make sure that we step back and we look at, we should not be paying more than we can buy it. Right now, it's cheap on the open market, so they should get it a little cheap. If it gets to the point where it's $3 or $5 on the open market, then we should be paying $3 or $5. But it's not fair to the general taxpayer to have to pay more back for people that have taken on the program, which the program's a great program. But as the program grows, and if we choose to go in that direction and keep the program, we need to make sure that we're not cutting ourselves off and that the general taxpayer isn't taking on the burden.
I had an idea you were going with. I'm glad you made that point. I
Okay.
agree with you. Mr. Harney?
Yep, I agree that the rate we pay is out of whack, and I understand that we'll be voting on February 17th. When has the EUAB voted on it?
This has not been reviewed, the UAB.
Okay. I think it's important that the EUAB be given an opportunity to review this before we vote on it. I think it would be an affront to the EUAB to have this major issue come before us without really giving them the opportunity to vet it. And I understand that there's some questions about the ongoing future of the EUAB, but as I understand it, the ordinance hasn't been repealed. The board hasn't been disbanded. And I think that this is a decision that's going to affect a lot of people. And I understand the rationale behind it, totally get it. But we are a utility that's responsible to the populace here. And I think the populace should have its board involved in this decision. Does that?
I think
Makes
I
sense.
think we need to have that conversation. I mean, it's not on the agenda tonight, but I think that's gonna have to come back and we're gonna have to have a conversation. Cause I'm hearing all different kinds of things
Right.
in the community, rumblings from board members, from whatever else. So if that's a conversation that needs to be had, we need to have it.
And Madam Mayor, if I may ask, Mr. Liberty, is this like a pressing matter, like this must be done basically 2.5 weeks from now? Or is this something that we can give the EUAB time to vet whatever proposal comes to us? Because if it's not a pressing matter, as if something's gonna break next month, then I think we can perhaps wait until March, until after the EUAB has heard it.
Is it a pressing matter? We're overpaying for energy every day.
There-
So can it wait another month?
There's the potential
Take
other
guidance
people
from the
could come
policymakers.
in the period of time and lock into certain commitments. I think that in any conversations we have had about any changes, that there's a certain sense that people would be grandfathered into certain arrangements because they've made major commitments. You don't want to inadvertently hurt someone who took advantage of the situation as it existed previously. So that's something to be resolved. As far as the EUAB, we've been having conversations about how to proceed going forward with best utilizing this process. One of the things that we had talked about was bringing back an ordinance change. So I'd prefer to do that at the next meeting. I appreciate your comments about moving through the process, but we haven't had a meeting with the UAB for 2 or 3 months, no?
No, we got together to review the power contract.
Okay, the power contract, which was the last big policy issue that was brought before them. And that was secured and obviously approved by the commission.
Bring it back
Who,
next week.
who is, if I will ask, if I can ask, who's sponsoring in a
This-
sense?
This has
the-
been a
the-
discussion we've been having with y'all individually, and we've had conversations about how to improve the visibility of the electric utility in the community. And it was really two different things that needed to occur. One was to have a special public meeting where the board of directors, y'all, sit and become more active in the issues and the things that are happening with the electric utility. And that is making it incredibly transparent, which was one of the reasons I think people were concerned about having the UAB. Electric utility was always treated as an afterthought. Even going back to the time when I got here, it was part of an Uber utility department. It wasn't even its own separate operation. So we've been trying to move to a professional, well-run entity. It's your largest business. You as the board of directors need to sit in this capacity and hear these things firsthand. Secondly, we wanted to do a report to the shareholders, which Ed's going to probably get towards. And you can see the level of competency and review and reporting that's occurring. That's very focused, business-like, and professional. And I think that's something that the owners, as well as you as the board of directors, will grow to understand better and appreciate and set policy direction in the public.
I think we don't need to have further conversation on it. You need
I
to
want to bring
to
it back at the next
bring it
meeting.
back. There's no, he answered the question and we'll bring it back and we'll have a full discussion on it. I'm ready.
I think it's very important for us to have a more active role in the decisions that get made with the electric utility. I do not, however, see a more active role being played by this commission as a good reason to change the way that the EUAB has operated. I find that the EUAB has been a very constructive board. I find that the EUAB and its members help us because they have more time to spend on those matters, us being a part-time body and some of them being having a professional background. And I feel that the EUAB is kind of in this holding pattern, but there's been no legislative activity on this board that's initiated that holding pattern. So I, frankly, until we have a workshop to discuss changing the ordinance, I would like to see the EUAB continue as is, because the members deserve that basic level of just appreciation. They want to continue doing their jobs, and we haven't said that they can't, up here in public at least. So I just think it's important.
I agree. Commissioner Robinson?
Commissioner Hardy mentioned the magic word workshop, and I think we are coming up to a conversation on boards as a workshop topic, and
Sorry, we gotta go.
just to, either have boards or do it differently, but it's a whole separate conversation that I don't think we're gonna have tonight, so.
Yeah.
But I would like to see more workshops on some of our more difficult decisions moving forward.
There's gonna be a lot of Tuesdays and Thursdays coming up soon, folks, so get used to it, because we've got a lot of workshops.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So we've had conversations, Ed, in private and in writing an email about financing a second tie line. Could you just go through some of the options that we've discussed about financing a second tie line that are different from using penny sales tax funds? Herman brought up a good point that this is an enterprise fund, and ideally there's a revenue stream that might be able to allow for some financing. And there are other, excuse me, I'm sorry, Commissioner Robinson. That's what happens when you serve with your good buddies.
So we can bring that back as a part of a tie line discussion, but there are many ways to finance utility infrastructure. It could be bonds, it could be by having somebody else actually own that tie line, if there was another entity that was interested in owning it, and then charging us a rate to use it. So at this point, we're not focusing on how we would pay for it, other than recognizing that
What
we
is it
would
gonna
have
cost?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how long will it take, and what route will it take?
Sure, okay, thank you.
All right.
Because
Let's
there
go
are
on.
other decisions that hinge off of,
You've got a big
what we do.
presentation here, let's go through.
yes. And staff thought I should stand to this because they thought that would make the the meeting move faster. Okay, so. He wants the clicker.
Do it really fast, so it isn't.
The financial discussion, first of all, I'll put out just a general disclaimer that these are non-GAAP financials. Okay, these are pro forma financial statements. These are not official financial statements. This is what we use as a dashboard, month to month, quarter to quarter, to observe how we're doing in the business. So the actual financials, of course, would come out of the city's finance department. But to give you a sense of what's on these forms and how to use them and what I use them for, I'll walk you through that. So in the top half of the page, we have the FY 2018 numbers. We have a series of lines there, 1, 2, and 3, which were the budget for 18. And then 4, 5, and 6 were what we actually came in at. Now, these are operating incomes, right? So this is not taking into account transfers to general fund and things like that. This is basically cash that came in and cash that came out, right? So what's left from the bottom line is what you have left over to pay contribution to general fund
You
and
mean
things
like
like
a
that.
P&L?
Yeah, like a P&L.
Wow. I've
So this
never
is-
seen one of those in
Yeah.
government.
So this is our version of a non-GAAP pro forma operating income statement, if you will. Down on the bottom, you'll see that we have the budget. And so in lines 7, 8, and 9, our budget by quarter. And then in lines 9, 10, or rather 10, 11, and 12 are the actuals. For example, in the 2019 first quarter actual, I'll point to one number, for example, operating revenue is $14.338 million. Our operating expenses were 11.247. So we have net operating income of $3.091 million, rough numbers. Now, if you look across the rows, you'll see in rows 10, 11, and 12, those numbers are forecasts because we haven't hit those numbers yet. So what we do is we take 3 months actual. Our forecast is to hit our budget, so we put the budget in there and we project ahead. We actually do this each month. We take a look at our actuals. We book the actual, if you will, in our statements, and then we forecast ahead for the rest of the year. When we do a budget amendment, the budget number will change. Now, one of the things that I'll point out here is that our operating expenses, I'll point out to an item. So if you look at an item 12, you should have flagged something and said, gee, it shows that you're going to lose $49,000. No, we're not. The reason I say we're not is because when we did the budget, we put a flat number in for our purchase power costs because we weren't done with the negotiations. And we didn't want to telegraph a confidential number to the marketplace, being very blunt about it. So don't leave this meeting saying, oh my gosh, the utility's losing money in the second quarter. We put a number in there that we know is higher than what we ultimately bought the power for, but it's a placeholder that'll be adjusted going forward. The budget will stay as the budget until we issue a budget amendment. So if we look all the way on the right, if we look at our FY18 actuals, we came in at 3.611 million. We're currently forecasting to come in at 10.4 million.
I'm sorry, where is the 3.6?
Line 6 all the way to the far right.
Okay, gotcha.
And then line 12, 10.4. Now, what's not taken out of those numbers yet is the contribution to the general fund, right?
Right.
And if you remember that last year, we had a significant increase in costs that were unbudgeted due to the failure of GT2, which led to $1.2 million in repair costs for that, plus supplemental capacity charges.
And we got a portion of that back in the renegotiation with OUC.
Correct.
Okay.
So what we should not do tonight, and I hear the whispers in the crowd in the background, is say, wow, we got $10.4 million. What do we want to do with it? Hold on, folks. Don't do that. A portion of that is our contribution to the general fund. And then what's left goes to rebuild the fund balance that we depleted the prior year where we went negative.
Right.
Okay, and to fund our ongoing capital program. So it's not Christmas time.
Commissioner Hardy?
Yeah, I just, so this net operating income is not, I mean, is it or is it not net of interest? I mean, typically in GAAP, it's the operating income and the interest comes after. So that $10 million number, would interest be coming off of that after the fact, or?
There's some interest which is already charged out of that, but not
All of it, okay.
Correct.
Could you tell me about how much interest would be coming out of that?
I looked to Clyde Johnson to back me up on that on our interest number.
47,000.
It's gonna be close to about, $3 million.
Okay.
By the way, it's Clyde Johnson, who's our budget manager for the utility. What we tried to focus on here are the expenses that are somewhat manageable by the utility and that we can see, what's coming and what's going. I started this primarily because I wanted to know what's our residential revenue, what's our commercial revenue, what are the checks that we're writing out for power, what's the spread, how are we managing labor expense and understanding if we're ahead of it or behind it. Things like transfer general fund, I can't affect that. Interest, I can't affect that. It is what it is.
Real costs.
Yeah.
Or as we like to call it in small business, the monthly nut.
The monthly nut. Or the envelope we kick up downtown. Okay, busy slide. I refer to this as the quarterly overtime report. Staff put this for me. Why do I focus on this? Because this is the area where we have probably the biggest influence day to day, month to month on how we're doing. It's how we're controlling salary and labor expenses. This particular report breaks it down by department. It's the fiscal year 19, and as you look through that, you can see what we spent on salaries, what we incurred on overtime by group, and then for the month as a whole, or for in this case, the quarter as a whole. Although we do this every month. What you're seeing here is the quarterly results. Bottom right-hand corner, what do we look at? What we're looking here is that in terms of overtime, We are $71,000 below where we were last year at the same time in terms of overtime spent. Of that $71,000, I look to see, well, where is the biggest group that's contributing to that? Not because we like or don't like the group, has nothing to do with individuals, but where's the area where we're expending the bulk of our overtime? In this particular case, $62,000 is what we call the line department, or T&D, line 5. Again, that's not a reflection on the individuals. That seems to make sense because that's where the bulk of the non-anticipated or unintended expenses come up. We don't know when equipment's going to fail, and when it does fail, we work it. So we work overtime to fix it. So as we improve the system going forward, the amount of overtime that we spend to repair things that break should decrease.
That's in 1 quarter, 62,000?
1 quarter. Again, this is our biggest number where we have some discretion. The next few sheets, just to give you a perspective, we'll look at, and I won't go through those in detail, but if you wanted to say, hey, what was that number in FY18? What was it in FY17? And what was it in I just went back to 17. It'll give you a sense of what our salary numbers were and what the overtime numbers were, what the total salary and overtime was over those years. So, for example, if we look for FY17, all the way down in the bottom right-hand corner, total salaries and overhead. So line 28, 1.467 million, right? 1.467,292. That's 1.467 million was a total salary and overtime in fiscal year 17. If you flip to the same page for fiscal year 18, it's 1.407. So total salary and overtime actually decreased from 17 going into 18, even though we gave increased salary, increased rate, or increased the wage rate for folks. So by managing discretionary spend, we're able to operate the business without growing the bottom line of salary and overtime.
Commissioner Henry?
Yes, I've just got to ask a question. So, is that decrease in overtime, which has helped us out financially, is that offset anywhere else in terms of contract workers or anything like that?
No. What we're doing is we're hiring contractors where needed for new construction.
Okay,
Very little new construction was being done by our existing people.
okay. That's cool. All right, thank you.
So we're tackling system hardening and reliability improvement with contractor forces. We talked about this a few months ago, and you looked at the size of the magnitude of the projects that we need to do. You couldn't do that with the internal staff if you wanted to. It's impossible.
And then there's also like an expertise.
Correct. Working at the high voltage levels, the type of equipment, the machinery involved, we just don't own it
Okay.
to do that work.
Thank you.
Next.
Okay, so we've implemented a balanced scorecard approach. The city is doing this citywide. This is something that I've worked in companies that do this on a regular basis, so it's coming to Lake Worth. This is nothing necessarily new to the utility world, but we're adopting it here, so it's a matter of picking the right things and managing to it here. So we're catching up with what the rest of the world is doing. I know the city manager is passionate about this.
What I always say, we're gonna drag us into 2005.
So, and it's called a balanced scorecard for this reason. There are going to be items on these scorecards, and normally one thinks that if you're tracking something, you want it to be better than it was the prior year. You want to continually improve, and that's true. But some things come at the expense of other things. So you have to balance things. So, for example, we could make a dent in reliability by tripling, for example, I just pick a crazy number, our vegetation management contract. Go out and trim the heck out of everything in the territory. We'd probably blow the vegetation management budget, but you'd see the reliability numbers come down, improve, right? So it's a balanced scorecard. You have to look at this and say, how do you achieve an outcome working within the constraints of a balanced scorecard? So this is more applicable, for example, in an investor-owned utility, when people are on an incentive program, for example, where they'll drive certain metrics hard because it has a personal reward from at the risk of jeopardizing performance in other areas. So even in those environments, you use a balanced scorecard to say, hey, you can't sacrifice everything for the sake of one outcome. So you have to run the business in a balanced approach. So if we look at this sheet, this happens to be what we call the financial quadrant. There are 4 quadrants tonight. We're only talking about 2. Let's start looking at the financial quadrant. On the operating revenue side, we look at residential sales and commercial sales. So if you just go all the way to the far right, and you notice as you scan across from left to right, we have results for December of 18. We compare that to where we were in the prior year. We compare that to budget. But at the end of the day, if you go all the way to the far right and say, hey, for the first quarter, we were 4.7% ahead on residential sales, or $371,829, right? $371,829. So our residential sales were up for the first quarter. Unfortunately, our commercial sales were down for the first quarter. However, it did not completely offset what the residential market did. If you drill down on these numbers a little further, and we have some charts later on, we realize that we did great in October and November, and December, for some reason, went in the other direction. December went down for residential, went down for commercial. In the case of commercial, it wiped out the gains that we had in October and November. In the case of residential, it just lowered it slightly. You'll see some other line items here that we do track: private area lighting, pole attachment revenues, other revenues, and then we get into the expenses, the labor items down below, purchase power costs, and other O&M costs. The purpose of this is to have you see that we pay very close attention to these individual line items and understand what's happening under the hood in the business that you've entrusted us to run and grow. Next page is a continuation of the financials. Here we switch from
I'm
looking.
sorry, Ed. So when you look at this, you factor in the salaries and overtime, the purchase power costs and everything, so we're down 4.1.
On
Overall.
residential sales, we're actually ahead of budget by probably $600,000 on a year-to-date basis
Well,
overall.
So 4.1, you said residential sales, but commercial sales is factored in there, your operating side of it.
Commercial sales have decreased, but so that there's still a net gain in terms of sales.
Okay, so what does the negative
Above budget.
4.1 represent?
Which line item are you looking at?
Very bottom on the total, negative 4.1%.
Oh, our operating expenses are 4.1% below where we thought they would be at this point. So we've lowered our operating expenses and we've increased our sales.
Oh, okay, so the
Very good.
operating revenues are still in the plus at 1.4.
Yes.
Okay, I was continuing on,
The
like
net.
deducting out and thinking you were coming down to.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I should have made that clearer.
Okay.
So does everybody follow that? So our operating
Yes.
expenses are coming in lower than we were budgeted, and our sales came in higher than we're budgeted for the first quarter.
Okay, that's good then, okay. I thought they were washing each other out and there was a total down at the bottom
Right.
for both of them,
No.
okay.
But remember, though, we budgeted a flat power cost. So there's still, these are what I call non-GAAP. This is just our dashboard to run the business for.
Okay.
What this means is that in theory, we would have more money available to continue to execute on the capital investment program, therefore would need to borrow less. So if you keep in mind, it may not be intuitive, everybody, but we have little or no equity. So virtually every capital project that we entertain is done with debt. So in an investor-owned world, investor-owned utility, you might do projects roughly at a balance sheet might have a 50-50 debt-to-equity ratio. In our world, we're highly leveraged. We're mostly debt. So if we can make more money from selling power, it allows us to be in a position to maybe to borrow less.
Vice Mayor?
In tracking commercial, do you track it looking at vacancies? Because right now, we have a huge amount of vacancies. Is there a way to track, vacancies versus, just...
We don't track it, but I think we would have the data, because what we would have to look at is to say how many previously commercial accounts are inactive now, and is that number growing or slowing down? I don't have the answer for what that number is, but it's something that could be extracted, I think, from the system. It'd be difficult, but it would be an exercise to go through.
Well, it would be interesting to see this time last year with the amount of vacancies and see what those numbers are, how high or how low they may be compared to,
Right.
And what sectors of the city?
and
are
what
affected.
sectors of the city,
Yeah.
you know. We know we have large spaces on Dixie Highway, now in the downtown corridor where,
Yeah. Yeah, we don't track that in terms of actually putting it on a report, but I would think that the data would reside within the systems to go and extract it and assemble it in that manner.
Where's our GIS guy? Where is
yes,
he?
thank you.
Commissioner Robinson?
Well, going to the Commissioner Amoroso's question is, wouldn't you're gonna consider the increase or the additional usage too, right? So it would be a net, is what you're looking at.
It's possible that the use per account actually decreased. Certainly, the number of accounts has probably changed. I don't think there's been a big change in the number of accounts, but the use per account has probably decreased.
That was where I was
Right.
going.
My sense is that there was probably, if we look at the weather, there was probably something weather-related in December that took us below the expected budget, and the budget was based largely on multiple years of experience in terms of the amount of energy that we would deliver and the revenues that we would see. So my gut tells me that it was weather-related in December.
I wanted not to emphasize vacancies, that's all.
Right. And the October and November revenues were above budget. It's just the December number that went down and brought the net for the quarter for commercial down below the budget.
So we're still doing good. The pole attachment revenues, you're predicting going down.
No, we're predicting pole attachment revenues increasing. We're currently in negotiations, and I realize I didn't have it on significant activities, but we're currently in negotiations with both Comcast and AT&T to renegotiate our pole attachment rates. So we are forecasting our,
In line 4, then, that shows minus, but it's not really a minus.
the minus means that the first quarter was below budget.
You budgeted.
Right, but for the course of the year, we expect our total pole attachment revenues to increase. And we have in our budget on a month-to-month basis shown an expected new revenue stream that was in the budget.
Okay.
And we are progressing in that negotiation with the assistance of counsel right now with AT&T. Right, we use a conservative number. Now, it's a negotiation. Ultimately, we'll reach a negotiated number, but
And we can credit the EUAB for a little bit of that input.
on pole attachments,
On the realization that there was income not gained.
yeah, I'd have to go back. I don't recall the UAB being involved with directing us to do anything with pole attachments. I think I've advised them of what we're doing, but I don't think there was any direction
No,
from UAB to do that. But that was an initiative that we undertook quite some time ago to get started in that. And that began with, first of all, doing an audit to determine how many attachments they had. This audit had not been done in probably 20 years, is my guess. So we have found thousands of attachments that were made to city utility infrastructure without the approval of the city that we were not paid for over the
and
years.
without any income from it.
Correct.
I think it started at the Park of Commerce. But didn't it? Yeah, it goes back that far.
Yep.
Commissioner Hardy?
Sure. I would certainly like to see that hypothesis about vacancies tested. I think that's very interesting. I don't know if our planning staff tracks vacancies or how they would track vacancies throughout the city, but I think that might be a good way to do it, and I never really thought of it that way. So yeah, I would definitely like to see those data extracted and organized.
Right.
Not only so that you can use it, but also I think so that the planning staff can use it, because that's an important piece of information that we may or may not be tracking.
Perception.
Right. We can look at number of active commercial accounts at the end of each quarter, for example, and compare that to the prior to see what the trend is.
And geographically also, like with, like the accounts associated with certain addresses.
That's what I
would
said
be-
on the GIS.
Yeah, that's
Right.
going to be a little bit
Precisely.
more difficult to do, is to go back and look and see, commercial accounts by sector of the city somehow. That's quite an exercise.
Yeah.
I think it may be I don't know. I mean, I'd like to talk with William about it, but yeah,
I would
appreciate
think,
the
you know,
conversation.
combination of GIS and looking at Avaline customer records, that could be extracted. I personally don't know how to do it, but
Yeah.
you know, I think my team can quickly tell us the commercial customer count by quarter each year
Right.
and do some comparisons, but by geographic location, that'd be a little bit hard. I'd need GIS help to do that.
Okay, awesome. All right.
Vice Mayor?
Well, and I just think it will bring value, you know, not just vacancy, but for instance, when I moved from a larger location to a smaller location. So I indeed have a new account, but I'm paying less in utilities. Starbucks moved from a smaller location to a larger, so they're paying more in utilities. So, you know, it's give and take, but as we make decisions for new growth, it's good to know, for instance, you know, if you're an old Publix moving to a new Publix, of course, you're going to pay less because it's a new location.
Right.
You know, and we need to look at those things and take it into consideration, especially when it affects the bottom line.
This is not unusual, even in the investor-owned world. I can tell you for large utilities to have a customer move from location A to location B, right? So at location A, you now have a vacated site that's no longer drawing power. And then to make it even more difficult in the utility may have spent dollars to provide them with service, to establish service for location B. And then at location B, they're operating much more efficient equipment than they ran at location A.
Yeah.
So it's the same customer, you've incurred more expense, and then you're collecting lower revenues.
Yes.
And you're showing a vacancy at location A, unless a new customer comes in,
Yeah.
which, depending on the revitalization of the area, may be years or days.
True. Thank
So
you.
it's a complex issue.
Let's keep it going.
Okay. All right, so this page looks at
We did this one.
the kilowatt hours that were actually pushed out to the customers, not just the dollars, but the amount of energy that went to them. Similar analysis. And then as we go down the page, you'll see we do track degree days, which is at the margin, a driver of electric consumption. So if you, for example, had the same number of customers and the amount of degree days that you had, it was more heating days or more cooling days, that's going to drive your energy use at that particular customer. It's a way to help us understand if we're seeing things happen because of some structural issue, meaning that customers are leaving or they're not using as much power, is it weather related or some other issue? So it's just an additional diagnostic to look at and say, is it weather related? What we can say is from a degree day point of view, we're up 4.9% on degree days versus the same period last year, which would tend to explain why the residential sales were up. Kind of goes hand in hand. Meter data. This is where we get into some of the issues with respect to meters. So in the bottom left, these are customers who were disconnected. So if we look across on line 26, we had in December of 17, we had 518 customers who were disconnected for non-payment. At the time of disconnect, they owed us an average of $252. The total dollars that represented was $130,000. Fast forward to the same period in 18, we're saying 503 customers were disconnected. However, they owed us $349. So it increased from $252 on average at disconnect to $349 for a total of $171. So the amount owed at time of disconnect, both on an average basis and a total basis, has gone up. Down below that in the collections, you'll see that of the 503 that were disconnected, 109 went to collections. The amount that went to collections averaged $254 per customer that was disconnected and did not pay, and $27,000 went out to collections. On the far right, we can see that number has grown substantially over the prior year. So the amount of money that customers owe us at the time of disconnect is going up, and the amount of money that we have to go out to collections is going up.
Vice Mayor?
This is one of my biggest concerns, and I see that Vice Mayor Pro Tem Maxwell has weighed in. When we got elected, this was one of our biggest challenges, and the thing that we went after, and the mayor can contest to that. I thought we were doing a lot better than we are, only because we limited the days that the billing cycles were, and we were trying to do different things. this comes up a lot with me, with especially larger accounts, that because they're a business, we may let them go a little longer. I've seen, because I monitor this on a regular basis, I've seen churches, for instance, the vegetable stand out Lake Worth Road, when they went out of business, I think it was $16,000 they owed us. I think we need to really look at this. I think we can do better. I think whoever is monitoring and controlling accounts need to have their finger on the pulse a little bit more, and not, I'm a business owner. We all have problems paying bills. We all have bad times. We have medical issues. But certain accounts, especially larger accounts that can affect this, we need to really watch. And then there's also programs in Palm Beach County that help people that can't pay bills. There's organizations. Maybe we can do better with connecting them to people that need to pay their bills. But whatever it is, I personally thought that we had fixed some of those problems. It looks like we need to do better.
Yeah, I don't have the history necessarily, so I don't know if we're doing better or worse than we were prior to the commission looking at this. I'm reporting on where we are today.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking at this as an area where we want to make some inroads. The amount that goes out to collections is,
But the amount we get back from collections is pitiful too.
I would
you know,
assume that
and
it is.
you're
I don't,
paying
I haven't
more,
been given that
You've
number.
already paid your staff to do
Right.
it, and now you're
Right.
sending it out. And
My view is to cure that with appropriate deposits. The tough part is if you have a customer who's giving no indication that they're in trouble, and their deposit was set, and there's been no reason to change their deposit over the years, when you find out they're in trouble, you're deep, right?
And I
Like
can
deeply
tell
into
you, with my personal bills, I have 5 different accounts that I pay, and I quite often don't pay it on time to
Right.
see that I'm getting the late fees or the notices, making sure that, I do it internally. I'll drop my payment in the box. I'll take it in and pay $2 just to see if everything's working. But we haven't seen this in a while, and to me, it's a little concerning.
So by putting it on a dashboard, on a scorecard, it's now something that we're looking at monthly. So this is something that's on Joel's radar, and it's coming on to Frank's radar, and we're going to be looking at to say, how do we get much more aggressive about this? The quickest there's 2 ways to cure it. One is to shut them off as soon as they're late. We're very aggressive with our shutoffs. I've taken the position that unless I'm directed from elsewhere, the shutoff will occur as per the policy. I have no choice. Now, what we can do is look at the second area, which is, are the deposits large enough to cover our exposure? Now, it's hard to go to a customer who's given us no reason to suspect that they're a risk and say, your deposit's too low if you were to default, but I haven't defaulted. Well, we think your deposit's too low. We don't have that. But where we do have discretion to raise deposits, we need to be much more aggressive about it. Now, that can be a hardship that people that have find out that, now they've missed the payment and their deposit's going to step up significantly. So what we've talked about is trying to phase that in over 3, 4, 5, 6 months to allow that customer deposit to increase their level of deposit, but still get them turned back on. They, of course, have to pay everything they owe at that point. And then if they have a second triggering event, that's it. Grace period to get your deposit up to speed is off, and we're going to step you up. That's something we need to take a look at and come back for a policy discussion. But by having it here and putting it on tonight's list for you to see is we're looking at this. It's an indication that we think it's serious and we're looking at it.
Just real quick, as you say that, a lot of them are repeat, so I think we can monitor it there with repeat. I've seen return checks. There's policies and procedures that if there's a return check or there's a repeat, that automatically it clicks in, but I don't know that all the time that's being done. So we just need, because if it's not being done, then we end up, on behalf of the taxpayers and the overseers, having to take on the expenses of, non-payment.
And that's an important distinction between the public sector and the private sector. In the private sector, that loss is spread to the mythical, investor that's out there, or hypothetical investor that's out there. In the municipal environment, it's spread to your neighbor. Your neighbor is picking up the cost of your default, if you default, whoever it is.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. I'm not going to add a great deal to what's already been said on this issue. However, I am curious, a little bit curious. There's two variables here in this whole mix that I'm curious about. Number one, I think it's true that we can say that overall cost of utilities, or excuse me, electric in general, has gone down over the years. And our policy of securing security deposits has been revamped in the last 5 years or whatever. I'm just curious, how's it getting away from us? If we are charging the new folks that are coming on board, so what I'm sensing here is are these potentially older customers that are now defaulting on us? Or are they the new customers? Because you were talking about the person that's been going along for a period of time, no issues, and all of a sudden, boom, something happens. So are we experiencing this with our older accounts, or is this
I
coming
think
from
it's,
the newer accounts?
I think it's uniform across the table. I wouldn't single out a particular group of customers. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from.
Well, I think, I'm sorry, not to cut you off, I think maybe it would be time, it's been several years since we've talked about this. Maybe it's time for a presentation on our collections policy, so we can all be refreshed on how it works and get some numbers as to how many people are currently in the new system with online utilities or whatever the heck they were, that does our screening for us, and how many customers are still outside of that box. They've been here for years and years
Right.
and years. And I think we need to have another bite at this apple, because the economy's better, so they say. And but you're telling us that maybe the collections are starting to become a little bit more of an issue.
Well, I don't know if it's a bigger issue than it was before. I'm saying it's something that I want to look at, and I'm now tracking on a scorecard to see what direction is it going in.
Yeah,
So
but-
it may be better than it was before. I don't know.
Oh, there was a
What I'm
time when
saying
it was
is,
pretty rough.
I view
It
this.
is better. We
Right.
can tell you it's
The
better
total
than 7
amount
years
may be,
ago, but.
maybe better. I look at that as an area where I say, for example, if I can drop that number by $1,000, that's the equivalent of adding 2 residential customers for a year. Great. I have to do a lot of work to add another residential customer, right? In terms of attracting them to the territory, open it up and establish service. But if I can do that just by doing it, have the same financial impact by doing a better job of staying current with deposits and collections, I achieve the same outcome. So I look at it from that point, improving the profitability of the utility.
It's
Thank
been
you.
probably 6 years since we looked.
5 or 6 years.
Yeah, 5 or 6 years since we looked at that, and I wanna say, and this is, I don't know, but I wanna say it was in the $369,000 to $465,000.
It was real money.
It was,
Yeah.
it was
I'm gonna
high.
go
Half
back
a
and
million
check that,
Yeah,
because it was up
it was
there.
higher
It was-
numbers.
Might have been higher than that,
Yeah.
but I wanna say somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000, I remember us being in the hole. You remember back then, that's ringing a bell to me, sorry, Commissioner Hardy?
No, I just want to say I love the way that Ed Liberty terms and represents these problems to himself and to his staff, right? For example, thinking of this problem in terms of residential, new residential customer utilities. I think that's a wonderful way to look at things, look at one thing in terms of other things. It helps you make trade-off decisions very well, so I appreciate that. Just an issue here. I understand that fixing some issues with deposits and asking for larger deposits will certainly help on this particular issue. But as we were having with the balanced scorecard conversation, there are businesses in the downtown and elsewhere who feel, for example, that the deposits that we ask for are very, very large, and that they, after having paid their bills for a long time, that they don't get the deposits back. And so I just want to drop this into the conversation. We may well solve this issue by thinking about some of these things differently. We may well also exacerbate other issues that we have in the down. I just want to put that, like in the downtown and, with business owners and with residents also, I hear that a lot, that they're really happy that the rate parity is there. They're happy when I tell them that we're working on making our distribution system more reliable. But with new customers in particular, whether it's here or in Palm Springs, I know a few people out in Palm Springs, they really, really harp on the deposit process. And so just a thought to draw that connection and put that in the conversation, because I think whenever we have that conversation, we need to think about that also.
I agree with you too. I get a lot of feedback about the deposits
Yeah,
too,
in
especially in the
particular.
commercial sector.
But I
the
I
end
see
of
the
the day,
rationale,
it's
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even the
yeah.
residential
And
sector.
I really like the way that you put it in terms of, obviously we all want more customers, and it obviously makes it more sustainable. So thinking about it in that terms helps me understand the importance of it as well. So
Vice Mayor Pro Tem?
Just a quick comment. It's my understanding that our current deposit system it mirrors in many ways FP&L. So if that is in fact true, they're not going to get a better deal.
I believe it does, but I have to say, I don't know for sure. I'm not an expert in that area, so
Lawyers
yeah.
nod your head no. But it's a factor based on your credit. And, I'm just saying, I don't think
I've
it's,
been told otherwise, I've been told otherwise, that
Well,
it's a
but-
much higher percentage.
It's also
than
based on
FP&L.
how it was used
previous
previously.
account.
Yeah,
Well,
the previous count.
well,
Right.
let's take a holistic look at it.
Yeah, so previous occupancy patterns or the use of the previous tenant is a factor, but there is also opportunity for a discussion
Right.
to set that to a reasonable number.
And I don't personally know
Right.
the people that have talked to me, to know their past history or whatever. I know they're in prominent positions and hold high-level jobs, so, but yet, that doesn't mean anything,
And, on that front, with the city that's had some of the issues that we've had with housing overcrowding, for example, right? So if you have a single-family home that's being used by multiple families, and then somebody comes in and buys that home and flips it, and now you have a new an actual single family buying that home, and previous use patterns come into play, there's an issue with the deposit, and that's what I've heard a few times from a few different people, and as Madam Mayor said, from people of different backgrounds who, have worldly experience. So I just, as we have that conversation, I want to make sure that we're linking it to
take a
other
look at it.
things that we
Just-
value.
Yeah, just to see what the evaluation process is, that would be great.
So one of the things that I'll say is, we knew that by having this type of discussion, and that's why we have this third meeting of the month, just for, it draws you into a lot of these discussions.
Sure.
And frankly, not that we're looking for relief on these things, but one of the things I want to make sure is that staff isn't setting policy, especially public policy. Our job is to bring you information and trends, and where there's a policy decision that needs to be made, we look for you to help us make that policy, and then we'll affect it.
All right, indecent definitions.
Yes. You should all memorize these. There will be a test. So these are reliability indices. Why do we bring that up? Because we're going to talk about these in the next slide. So system reliability is something that we're keenly attuned to. It's the big reason why we're doing the system hardening reliability improvement. What we've started doing is, and we've been doing now for a while, since I got here, is looking at our reliability performance. There are objective and subjective ways of looking at reliability, and we do that. And we calculate the numbers. We use an accepted statewide and national standard to publish our numbers, and we do share our data publicly, whether it's good or bad. It's out there. And we're not afraid to put it out there, because that's the basis from which we manage and show improvement going forward. And it's also the basis on which we set priorities in the work we're going to do. Again, in the context of a balanced scorecard, if we look on the top, you'll see reliability indices, SAIDI, CAFE, SAFE, MAFE, and LBAR, and all of those mean something to us, and over time, they'll mean something to you as well. Many of these are
Give us
tracked.
our first lesson in that. We got our first lesson.
Many of these are
You
tracked
gave us our first lesson in that.
in terms of minutes, and you'll see the minutes in December in a column, and then the goal, and this thing called rank and quartile. So what does that mean? All of the utilities in the state report these numbers. In the municipal utility world, we report them monthly to the Florida Municipal Power Agency, and we share them. Lake Worth was not a participant in that process for many years. We are now a participant in that process. We provide our numbers, and we share them, and they're published. The investor-owned utilities do this annually. They submit their numbers to the Public Service Commission in Tallahassee, and then their numbers are published in an annual report that are available for everybody to see. So what do these numbers mean? So the goal ties to the rank and to the quartile. I decided that, by management fiat, that we're going to take the results of all of the utilities in the state and divide it into quartiles. First quartile, second quartile, third quartile, fourth quartile. Our goal over time is to be in the top quartile or first quartile. We're not there. We have gotten there on an individual month, but we're not there on an annual basis. So, for example, if you look at that December number for SAIDI of 1.8, the goal was 0.8. You say, well, how did you set the goal? The goal is the last utility in the top quartile. So our goal would have been to be in the top quartile. They're in our spot. We need to get them out of it. Right? We want to be there. So we would have had to go from 1.8 to 0.8. So why do we show that? It's to help us understand how much better we need to do if we want to be top quartile in that month, in that indice. The rank A to 15, that meant of the 15 utilities that reported that index for that month, we were the 8th. We were in the second quartile. Year to date, same concept. You'll see that our year to date rank was 21 out of 25. So even though we were in the second quartile for the month, we were 21 out of 25 or fourth quartile for the year. Not great, but that's where we are. And our goal was
We can't get better unless we
correct.
take a look at where we're at.
Now, good news in Katy, we made the top quartile. We're 2 out of 25. Safety and Mayfi, fourth quartile, and then L-Bar, third, and you can go back to the definitions to see what they all are. Now, these numbers are just numbers, right? They're numbers that we calculated using a whole bunch of outages and hundreds, if not thousands of outages, boil them down, exclude the ones we can exclude. This looks at just the distribution system. You have to take these numbers with a grain of salt, so they're general indicators. It's more important to look at how we're doing year over year versus how we're doing relative to the competition, but understanding where the competition is helpful in having our customers and our residents understand where we are and what they're feeling. So this is quantifying what they're feeling. And that's why we want to understand it. One of the things that's actually going to hurt us when we look at our 2018 numbers versus 2017, and it's not intuitively obvious, but in 2017, we calculated our outage time based on the time that the customer called us. That started the clock. We've made the decision in 2018 that we're going to use the timestamp on the AMI system. So that means that an outage, if a customer might have waited 5 minutes to make that phone call, we would have looked better. But we're going to use the harsher number, which is what the meter tells us. So we're going to use that consistently going forward. Not all of the utilities have AMI. I don't know how they calculate theirs, but I know how we're going to calculate ours. The other items we won't spend a lot of time on, I think they're on here mostly so that you'll see the types of things that we're managing. I'm sorry.
Commissioner Hardy?
No, I just wanted to say you deserve a lot of credit for thinking about this differently than previous people have thought about it. And I think our residents are seeing the difference,
Right.
and I think they're going to continue to see the difference over time. So I appreciate the work that you've done here and the way that you have thought about this. It's a
Commissioner
very clear
Robinson?
difference.
As long as the communication is that he's doing it the right way, and they all know that that's how it's done.
Our integrity is important,
Well, and the public needs to know.
right?
Vice Mayor?
The solar line with nothing in it, what does that represent?
It's actually solar is the category
underneath
below
it?
it, and
Okay.
I'll get to that. Talking about customer perception versus what we calculate streetlights. So where we were a year and a half ago, it was not unusual for me to get a call a week, an email a week, somebody complaining about a streetlight. All right, many of you in the audience probably called me directly and said, call that guy, tell him about a streetlight's broken. We had a lot of streetlights out, especially after the storm, 800 and some odd streetlights that were out. We put a focus on that. First we had to determine, well, how many streetlights do we have? Where are they? How many are not working? Let's get them fixed, and let's get them fixed quickly so we get a contractor in. Next thing is, well, how do we stay at that high level of performance? So we now, as a standing order, our night troublemen are instructed to drive the streets, cruise the streets, looking for streetlights that are broken. Now, the public doesn't see this statistic of 97.96% streetlights working. That doesn't mean anything to them. What I can feel is what they feel. I get fewer phone calls and emails. So either they took me off the list, they're calling somebody else, they're not calling you anymore, which they shouldn't do. They should go to the website and log the outage. I do some of those myself, by the way, so you guys should.
That's a running joke. I told him to put him off the explorer list.
So it feels better. This shows that it's better. But at the end of the day, it's the customers, some of which are here in the room tonight, they'll tell us whether it's actually better or not. We also set a goal for ourselves to repair a light within a certain amount of time after they call.
It's
And
a
we
public
track that.
it's a public safety issue, period. Great.
Private area lights, energy conservation audits, meter tampering. You see that meter tampering is up. You look at the far right, meter tampering, it's up over the prior year, 21.9%.
Whoa.
Meter tampering is an area that we're paying closer attention to. Ironically, when we switched to AMI, it meant that we didn't go read those meters, so we didn't see them. So now we're looking more closely at the data that the AMI system gives us to detect metering. So we're starting to employ that watchful eye on the AMI to see what's going on. We've actually seen an increase in the number of contractors that we catch doing work without a permit because we see the meter go into an outage situation. We'll roll a truck to go see why.
Well, the new meters too. I got contacted by your department too because remember my meter wasn't reading.
Correct.
Right? Just out of nowhere.
So we've gone, I believe that, outstanding customer service is when you help a customer before they even know they needed the help. So we see that a meter has gone blank, that we're getting an indication that meter stopped working, whether the customer's called the reporter or not. We're now
Immediately
being
though,
proactive to say, we're going to go check.
right? It happened in
It was like a day.
like a day or whatever. Yeah, the power was still on.
Yeah.
Just wasn't reporting.
Now, if it's daytime, we may roll up on the job and find that there's an electrical contractor in the driveway and they've pulled a meter without pulling a permit and didn't let us know they were going to do it.
Oh,
So
that's different. I wasn't doing anything wrong.
that will drive up revenue on the code side, but we are tracking these things.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say thank you because I get a lot of those calls, especially working with code and police. Are we actually arresting some of these people? I know that there were.
We don't have the power to arrest.
Okay.
The only time we would get law enforcement involved is if we see some evidence that there's been meter tampering,
Okay.
a theft of service situation, jumper.
Well,
that
I
stuff.
know that there.
Then we do.
That has come to my attention where they've actually taken the meter from somewhere else and put it over here.
Right.
They've stolen it from here and put it here, and they've
Right.
activated, and they're actually, using utility.
But if we get to a job and it's just a contractor doing work without a permit, we wouldn't need to call law enforcement and have them arrested. That's just a code enforcement issue.
Favorite story was the FP&L smart meter that somebody plugged the core into to our system. And I said, if it's such a smart meter for FP&L, they should have known where it was.
I get calls all the time saying, "You need to switch to FP&L." So I'm like, "Why are they calling you?" They call all throughout the city of Lake Worth. Soliciting.
I
don't
get
know
one
what
saying, "You haven't paid your FP&L
you don't
bill."
know.
Like, I don't have an FP&L
Walgreens.
bill.
We get requests for service and it's an FBL account that they should be calling FBL and they're upset because we haven't shown up yet. So in
Darn you.
that bottom category, see, I have the clicker, I get to keep talking. In that bottom category underneath solar net metered customers, so the way to look at that is that we have had a 109% increase in net metered customers over the prior year. And if we look at the solar energy purchases from customers, that's gone up by 270% over the prior year. This is why it's on the significant issues report.
They're actively soliciting though. The certified PACE providers are now actively soliciting homeowners to use this and refinance and to do whatever. Because I get calls all the time from them. They'll follow up and follow up and follow up. So they're looking to, I guess there was a waiting period for which some of these companies were not authorized. They had to get their certification or something. I don't know what
Could
it
have been
is.
their business license, I don't know.
But now it seems that there are a number of them.
And we're at 85,000.
85,000 is the kilowatt hours that have increased. The total sales are significantly above that. The total amount of power is well above the 85,000. 85,000 is how much more over the prior year.
Yeah.
So that number is going up significantly. So what it's-
Good and concerning all at the same time.
Yeah, we're now, this was not anticipated when the program was put into place. We're now paying a lot of money,
Bless you.
a lot more for the power than was originally expected. So, and again, that'll come back to the policy decision, what you'd like to do with it.
Okay.
This is just, the next two slides are really just graphs to show you the effects of the sales. You can see that residential was above the blue in the first 2 months of the fiscal year, and then went down below the blue in the third month, which was December. We talked about that earlier. This is just a graphic representation of that. And the commercial, we were above the blue, we were above budget in the first 2 months, October, November, and then December it went down below. So the amount that it decreased in December offset the gains that we had in October and November. I think that was probably, could be weather, and it could have been colder, it could have been rainier, it could have been wet. People didn't get out to enjoy the commercial establishments. I'm not sure. We don't know.
But doesn't our new purchase power agreements help us offset some of the reductions?
It lowers your cost for what you buy, but if you don't need to buy it anymore, it
Yeah,
doesn't
that's
help.
true. Okay. Yeah, that's it.
This is just a sense, just
So it's 6 sides to every coin, are there?
exactly. Exactly.
I don't even understand that.
This is just a background slide to help people get a perspective of from the standpoint of the numbers of meters that are out there. The vast majority of the meters, 23,000 plus, are in the residential sector, and 3,000 plus are in the commercial sector. It doesn't speak to actual revenues. This is the actual meter counts. And you can see that the residential net metered is at 68 now. The commercial net metered is at 5. And then that doesn't include applications that are currently in process, which are continuing to be processed. And that,
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Commissioner
So,
Robinson?
are we gonna have some marketing help in this policy of solar metering?
marketing help in what regard? In terms of communicating the ultimate decision?
Decisions, yes. Setting a policy, how we're gonna market a decision or market, come to a policy. Because we're gonna have to market, our decision.
Well, that'll be in the public
I
record,
don't-
and folks will be aware of the decision we make, and then we'll communicate that to the customers in terms of especially the ones that are affected, they will know about it.
And they're, well, I just want them.
If there's a
also want the
change, if there's a
public
change, the affected customers will be notified.
Notified, but I want them to know how we arrived at a policy.
Sure, that'll be part of the communication plan for
That's-
whatever policy is ultimately enacted.
So
If
it's-
none is enacted, if we leave it the way it is, then it's the way it
Well,
is.
I don't think we can leave it the way it is,
Mhm.
numbers wise.
Mhm.
But we need to change the marketing of the policy that we're going to come to sooner rather than later.
That's a policy. We need to come up with better communication strategies for a lot of our.
Well,
things.
but this
That's a
needs
whole
to
other
ch-
topic of conversation.
But this is a numbers thing that really needs attention.
Oh, yeah, I'm still waiting for my one sheet that goes to all the realtors that tells them so that they can tell all the people that say, the electric is so much more expensive in Lake Worth and this is so much more expensive. What we were gonna do back to Clay times, we were gonna get that one sheet and it was gonna go, we were gonna do a PR event with the realtors so that they would have something to give to people that wanted to relocate here to know how that was a big fallacy, that there are actually 3 utilities on our 1 utility bill. It's not just the electric, so you're not comparing apples to apples, you're comparing apples, oranges, and bananas to apples and whatever, and I haven't seen that yet either, so that's our marketing. Don't get the marketing chick crazy right now, because that makes me nuts.
Well-
Can we add that to the upcoming
Yeah,
agenda item for
well, our
electric?
workshop date,
Thank you.
can that come out of this meeting?
I think it just did.
What do you
They-
want?
It
You-
fell out of my face.
Ed, how's our commercial rates in the marketplace?
Why are you asking?
You want a one sheet. You got to be careful.
Our
with what you ask.
residential rates for people that are purchasing homes.
Where's our?
I want a residential one sheet for people that are purchasing homes and relocating to neighborhoods, that the neighborhood associations could have those sheets, that the realtors could have those sheets, to explain what our utility bill looks like for the city of Lake Worth as opposed to the city of another city with an FP&L bill that doesn't have water, sewer, and whatever else on it. I want them to see that we have rate parity. We're just as close to that as FP&L is. I want them to know that we are a reliable company and how our reliability numbers have gone up, all the money that we're putting into infrastructure and whatnot. I want them to see all the positive things and not the Lake Worth of old from 10 years ago that has changed dramatically. If not perfect, we know there's always room for improvement, and we know things aren't always black and white and cut and dry, but they have improved. We're not the city of old, and all of our stuff says we are. and people perceive us to be that other thing, and we're not. Just saying.
Did you want me to
We're
answer?
awesome.
No, I don't want you to answer that.
And that's it. No, just kidding.
Don't say that.
Can we look at a calendar for a workshop date?
Oh, wait, I want to move on to this. We have public participation of non-agenda items, and I do have a card. Ramsey Stevens?
Okay,
I'm sorry.
so
Good
we're
evening,
not,
Good evening, Your Honors. My name is Ramsey Stevens. I live at 618 South K Street. And I'd like to first thank you all for having this meeting. We clearly have some really big decisions facing our utility, and that makes sense because it's, arguably our biggest asset. And we're clearly in good hands. You all really, as a citizen, made me much more comfortable this evening. But that all being said, it's really critical that we not only make the right decisions for our utility, but that we make them with stakeholdership and buy-in as a community. So I hope that you will really not let the EUAB I hope you will not let the UAB be lost, because once it's gone, we probably won't get it back, and it does serve as an institutional memory, at the very least, let alone addressing a lot of your process issues that you brought up tonight. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ryan?
Good evening, Ryan Oblander, 1702 North A Street, active member of a inactive board. Don't know. That's just the one thing that we would like, some kind of final answer, because I have to plan my year, so I have to know if I have to keep my Wednesdays open for the rest of the year. But I'm glad that you're getting data dumped today. Makes me feel like I did on my first meeting at the EUAB. It's a little bit of a learning curve. I agree with Ramsey Stevens. The EUAB still serves a purpose. I'm not sure how often they would have to meet if you're doing monthly meetings here, but there's still things to be said that do come up in those meetings that kind of make their way onto the agendas, and that we do talk about, like, getting backup protection for the beach and things like that, just random things. Next thing, I know there's a lot of talk about solar net metering. It's kind of a grand experiment. I went and joined the PACE program, and I went through the process, and I'm actually one of the new detriments to our fiscal budget. And
we're blaming on you.
yeah, a lot of things. It's a victim of its own success, like some people have said, but people were promised something when they first got started. They're like, here's what's going to cost to build your system, here's your payback period, and then once it's taken away, it's like, well, I was hoodwinked. Something happened where I was grandfathered in maybe, and then the new people will get educated on the process, and the old people will have their term. So that's just something to think about going forward, about the people who have made those plans with the systems, and they're not cheap. Solar systems, even with the PACE program, it's not cheap. Let's see here. Also, there's talk about renewable certificates in the state of Florida. They don't have any value. So if we're not getting net metered monies, we're having this piece of paper that we could potentially use if Florida changes their mind in the future. The other thing is Lake Worth is being, have a lot of pride about going green. So it sends a strong message that we want you to have solar, but we don't really want you to have solar, but we have to figure out a way to make it work. I'm sure there's a way to look at all the national strategies for that. Other things I just wanted to briefly mention, a lot of people, my friends are talking about commercial rate parity. You mentioned it tonight. Just like to see where that's going. Or not even parity, but just something better. And lastly, I'll leave this on, if we can somehow work in a zombie invasion anniversary party for the city, that'd be a nice marketing strategy. Talk about marketing. We should have capitalized on that event.
Agreed.
There's something there. And that's all. Thank you.
With a tie line.
Thank you. All right. Consent agenda, I'll entertain a motion.
Well,
Commissioner Robinson,
are
did
we
you?
gonna talk about a date for a workshop to continue this?
They brought it up
policy?
in February.
Well, we have another meeting in February, don't we?
February 19th.
Can we bring it back to the February 19th meeting, the items that we asked to come back?
Some of them maybe, but some of them maybe not.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem.
I just want to know if my lights still work because you're moving on to the next agenda. I
It's
wanted
the
to-
tissue's fault.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's the tissue.
No, it's actually.
It's obstructing
I
the
would-
view.
yeah, no, I-
You got a disconnect.
I think I do batteries too.
And the microphones.
Thank you so very much. Anyway, Ed, I want to thank you for your presentation, and I see some of your staff in the room here. Would you be so kind, would they be embarrassed if you stood up and pointed them out and called out their names so we can thank them?
Clyde Johnson, who's our budget manager.
I'm sorry.
Recently promoted, but-
Yeah.
We didn't have enough time to set up the Soul Train line for each introduction.
Exactly. Who else you got here?
So all of the documents that you saw in front of you, Clyde scrambled to put those together today. He also ran a meeting with our finance manager or finance director this morning, where we went through a lot of the same in detail. So Clyde's doing a great job. Walt Gill, who's our assistant director for transmission distribution, of course, is here. Walt is charged largely with executing on the SHRIP project, but he also, of course, will be here at many meetings. If I can't be here, Walt is typically the person who's charged of being here. Brian King is in the audience tonight, who's our power generation manager, who sees over all things power generation. Jason Bailey, who runs system operations. So if the lights blink at 2 o'clock in the morning, he's probably at system ops in about 3 minutes in his bathrobe. So
You're the guy. No.
You can introduce Lee too if you want
and
to.
not a part of my team, but of course is Lee, who is our IT director, who has been instrumental in helping us kind of revamp our IT infrastructure. Will be heavily involved with our new electric system operations center and in greatly improving our security posture going forward on the IT side and helping us with our operational technology. For example, SCADA, he will be heavily involved with the implementation of SCADA. We didn't talk about it tonight, but I'll throw it out there that we are integrating from a standpoint of management philosophy and mutual support the electric utilities operational technology needs with the skill sets that reside in the IT department. We will not be an island in terms of our knowledge and our cooperation. We're going to work very closely with IT.
And I'd like to, I know this is on consent agenda, but I'd also like to talk a little bit more in depth because I know we've had a chance to talk about some of these introductions and what we're doing from a security level for the city. I mean, obviously, let's not talk about it too much, about what we can. But some interesting things that are happening here and really bringing us up in upping our game here in the city and in every department. All right, well, great. I'll entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by the vice mayor, seconded by the vice mayor pro tem. All those in favor state so by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, motion carries unanimously, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
adjourn.
There you go, second. I need a second. Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.